On July 24, 1967, a group of 5 friends ventured into the depths of Mossdale Caverns, a cave system known for its dangerous and complex structure. Little did they know this would be the beginning of a horrifying journey. The main experienced cavers had no idea that they were about to descend into one of the most terrifying and tragic incidents in caving history. As the group descended deeper into the cave, the sense of excitement was palpable. The anticipation of discovery and the challenge of navigating the dark, tight passages was exhilarating. But soon the thrill turned to unease. The cave seemed to close in on them. The set with humidity and the atmosphere growing colder. They were now in a space where time and safety didn't sure shit matter. They were not prepared for what awaited them. Hours into their exploration, the group stumbled upon a section of the cave that was more treacherous than they anticipated. They found themselves trapped by a series of narrow flooded passageways. The water levels rose unexpectedly and they were forced to take shelter. The group was stuck, unsure if rescue teams would be able to find them in time. The realization that they were in grave danger slowly began to sink in. As hours turned into days, the group isolated situation became more dire. The cold, the dark, and the constant wetness took a toll on them physically and mentally. With no way out, their hope of survival dwindled. They rationed what little food and water they'd left. There wasn't sure state enough to sustain them. Despair started to set in as they realized that they may not make it out alive. One by one, the group members started to panic. Their minds began to unravel, each man dealing with the stress in his own way. Some attempted to keep their spirits up, while others began to lash out at each other. The group was slowly falling apart. The emotional toll of being trapped on the ground with no sign of rescue was too much for them to handle. With the days stretching on, the men began to discuss extreme measures. They wondered if they would need to start thinking about eating whatever they could find, or even, in the most desperate cases, resorting to cannibalism. But would it come to that? They tried to hold on to their humanity, but the horror of the situation was pushing them to the brink. As their situation worsened, a glimmer of hope emerged. One of the men found a faint trail of fresh air coming from a narrow passage. It was the first sign of escape they had seen. Could this small break in the caballero's darkness lead to freedom? The men scrambled to navigate this passage, desperate for any chance of survival. Just as quickly as it appeared, the hope of escape vanished. The narrow passage led them to an even more treacherous part of the cave, and they found themselves trapped once again. Their hope turned to anguish as they realized that they were more lost than ever. They had no way of knowing how deep they'd gone or how much further they would have to go to find a way out. Days passed and hunger became the oppressive force that weighed them down. Their bodies were growing weaker and their energy was running low. The constant hunger gnawed at their spirits, and even the faintest thought of food was enough to send them into a frenzy. But there was nothing to eat, no way out, and no one coming to help. As the men grew weaker, their personalities began to clash even more. The bonds of friendship and camaraderie that had once held them together were fraying. Some became quiet, resigned to their fate, while others grew desperate, lashing out in anger. Their mental states were deteriorating, and they could no longer trust each other. The isolation and horror of their situation pushed some of the men into complete madness. The lack of food and water, coupled with the constant fear of death, drove them to the edge of sanity. Hallucinations began to set in. Some men heard voices or saw things that were not surefit there. The sense of reality began to blur, and they started to forget what it was like to be free. In a final attempt to escape, one of the men tried to climb his way out of the cave using the ropes they had left, but the effort was in vain. The cave had already swallowed too much of them. The ropes were frayed and his strength had completely depleted. He fell and there was no way to recover. As the men came to terms with the inevitable, their final words were filled with regret and sorrow. They had not known that the cave would be their tomb. Perhaps the most haunting thing was the silence that followed. The men were too weak to speak, and the cave seemed to swallow every last bit of sound. The hunger became the heavy guest everywhere, hovering around them like an evil spirit they could not escape. Food was the forbidden word. The companions avoided mentioning it, as if uttering it would bring doom. And as hunger stole their strength, they knew that the chance of survival had become slimmer than the possibility of finding a morsel of food. Then came the terrifying question: should they think about eating each other, or would they simply accept their fate? The mental strain was stronger than anything else. Every moment that passed felt like a lifetime. Every step in the dark made them feel more lost. Some began speaking about the past life as though it was a distant memory. Some cried, others went silent, but the truth was clear. The cave was taking them all, body and mind, one by one. The resistance was weak. The end seemed nearer than ever. As the days passed, the body weakened and thoughts became foggy. Even their voices were no longer clear. Death came quietly, gently, as if it knew it would face no resistance. The movement of their bodies became erratic, as though rolling from pain to stillness. What remained of these men no longer cared what would happen next. They just wished someone would take them out of this nightmare. The darkness that had begun to pierce the walls now resided within them. As things got worse, one of them suddenly made a desperate attempt to reach the outside world. Perhaps the ropes thrown to him by the rescue teams were insufficient, but hope was the last thing left. As he struggled for survival, the eyes of his companions watched him eagerly. There was one last desire to connect with the outside world, but fear also chased him. Could he make it, or would he lose hope completely? In the final moments, the cave continued to devour the last of these men. They were completely surrendered, with nothing left but to gaze at the small gap of hope that appeared on the horizon. As they disappeared one by one, they seemed to watch over them, caressing them gently before leaving them coldly. And in that moment, agony was the last feeling left. They knew they had left this place, but the psychological dimensions of the pain would stay with them forever. At some point, rescue teams entered. The light was dim, and words were few. But the shock came when the first of the rescued were nothing more than skeletal remains. No one remembered who they were or what their faces looked like. The rescue came too late, and the souls left behind in the cave had no voice in the outside world. But life went on, and the wheel of time kept turning. No one knew how far these men had gone after leaving this cave, but they became part of history that would never be forgotten. Every time the teams looked at the photos and evidence found at the site, they were filled with sorrow, because everything spoke of shattered moments of fire and terror. From here came the question, how could a place have such power in destroying human souls? The cave was a place that redefined the meaning of suffering. Through the narrow walls and darkness, history was written, and the messages wept on the walls of the past. Every time they tried to extract details using modern technology, they remembered that the greatest lesson learned was that there is no room for mercy in such caves. While some try to overcome this incident now, memories still dwell within the caves. Perhaps the cave no longer exists, but the horrific image of this event became a landmark that would never fade from people. The bodies in these minds. The victims left a mark, a message that natural forces, no matter how mysterious, can play a role in controlling human lives. Life and death are not always under our control. The horizon was approaching, and at the corners of the cave, silence bore witness to the end. If there were lessons learned from this event, they were contradictory lessons: strength and weakness, hope and despair. In the end, the cave remained holding many secrets. And the real question remains, was what happened just an accident or a harbinger of a greater tragedy that could occur elsewhere?